It's Friday, the 27th of April, 2018. You're listening to Real Media, amusing ourselves to death. And today we're going to be talking about targets, radicalisation, BP, Barclays. Cam, have I missed anything out?
Capita.
Oh yeah, targets.
And a little bit about the continuing fallout, I guess, that's happening with Windrush, but putting a new angle on it from some things I've learned about the data protection bill.
Okay, so data protection bill, and also I think you said that you wanted to talk about Michael Gove.
Oh, yes. That's a good story.
Okay, great. There's quite a few other things that we might slide in. But yeah, what were you wanting to say about Michael Gove and Sajid Javid?
Well, so we're going straight to that one. Okay. Solomon Hughes, who writes sometimes for Private Eye and Vice magazine, he's very good, actually, if you can follow him. He wrote a piece for Vice this week, which talked about how Michael Gove and Sajid Javid attended a hawkish Republican event hosted by the American Enterprise Institute. Now, the American Enterprise Institute is one of the well-known kind of corporate lobbyist-style think tanks in the US.
Okay, AEI.
Yeah. I've mentioned them before. I said they were the ones who had suggested that the new basic income should be total deregulation and a small basic income, right? So that was their conditionality. So they're a very heavily deregulatory think tank. And apparently Sajid Javid and Michael Gove took the time to go to their event called the World Forum, which Solomon Hughes highlighted, despite the fact that the American Enterprise Institute is one of these organizations that loves the press, loves getting their news out there and loves talking about themselves. This wasn't listed on any kind of site. No one was talking about it. It was actually a very private event.
So they've gone to a secret meeting?
Basically, yes.
In the US?
In the US. Apparently there's a lot to do with the military and arms, and they were discussing potential ways to deal with Iran, China, Russia. But these are very, very powerful people, and Michael Gove and Sajid Javid both went there. Now,
and this is on Vice magazine?
This is on
Vice.com?
Vice.com, yeah. I guess
cool.
The point is that we're kind of having this whole Brexit thing playing out in the background, and no one's still talking about deregulation. Sajid Javid, in 2015, was it? He made a big speech to businesses saying that talking about the successes of his deregulation agenda. Now, that's not something he talks about publicly.
Oh, yeah, that's when he was business secretary, isn't it? And
yeah,
because they'd already passed the deregulation bill, and he said, okay, now let's do a red tape kind of cutting agenda after having just done it. So, yeah, unstoppable.
And he was like, we're going to be we're the only country in the world to have achieved the number of kind of deregulatory measures that we have. They do the 1 in, 3 out. So for every new regulation brought in, 3 are taken away.
Yeah, I think it was 1 in, 1 out, then 1 in, 2 out, and then I didn't realise it was 1 in, 3 out. I remember when Donald Trump came in, one of the first things he did was he said, I'm going to do 1 in, 2 out. And I remember realising that he got that from over here.
He did. The Cato Institute, which is another one of these network think tanks that are involved in it, wrote an article in January of last year, saying lessons from the UK, 1 in, 2 out. And now he's looking to extend that to 1 in, 3 out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when you see that Brussels was taking a lot of their lead from the City of London, UK, and that America end up copying what we were doing first, through the Cameron initiatives. That's quite...
And over there, it's much more talked about, this is his deregulation agenda. This is what Trump is doing. He's getting rid of these protections. But here, we've had it happen with really no conversation.
Would you remember last year I said to you, have you read the latest Naomi Klein book? And you said, no, I haven't. And I said, well, nor have I. And then I said, well, why is it that neither of us have read it, nor do we seem interested in it? And you said, well, because in America, they're completely upfront about deregulation, whereas over here, we've got Brexit and it all happens without talking about it.
Yeah. It's a different political situation, even though the same things are happening, like almost exactly the same, right? They've literally lifted the 1 in, 2 out policy from us. And we've had that happen, and we haven't talked about the effects of that on all of these services with Grenfell, now it started to be touched on, the idea of deregulation and how housing had been left in such a state and how these conditions were allowed to continue, and that was to do with a government agenda. Clearly, that's what Sajid Javid said. It was a deregulation agenda. And yet, we're not talking about that as a technique or as an aspect of what's going on in our society, and yet it could be linked to many of the problems we have.
Okay. What other events are we going to get onto now?
Well, we could talk... Okay, do you want to talk about the little bit about Windrush and the data protection bill?
Okay, I don't know anything about it, so go for it.
Well, it's interesting that after Brexit, we haven't really had much of a discussion about what the government is going to do in terms of the immigration bill. That's now been kicked back, possibly to the end of this year, possibly to the start of 2019. And they've also got this data protection bill. Now, about a year ago, I think Diane Abbott wrote an article for Huffington Post that said the data protection bill means open season on immigrants. And the realities of what that means, I think there's still, as Bev Skeggs said, a gap between people's imaginations and the reality of what people are able to do with the kind of information that they've got. So it looks like this data protection bill is going to be pushed through, and it's in the kind of final stages. It's in the House of Commons. And I've been speaking to a couple of people about it. Gracie from Liberty. Liberty have been asking for some amendments to the bill. What they've asked for are...
what's the problem with the data protection bill? Is that what it's called?
Yeah, the data protection bill. So I think you can kind of work out what's wrong with it if we go through some of the amendments that Liberty have asked for. So one of them is to prevent the delegation of powers. There are powers in the bill that allow MPs and representatives to change it or amend it or add exemptions after the bill has been passed.
Right.
They also want to prevent automated decision making. So this is predictive policing, right? This is algorithms making decisions about whether you get something or you don't, or whether you're likely to reoffend. Liberty have asked for them not to allow automated decision making to have an effect on things that affect people's human rights. Of course, Theresa May is not a big fan of the old Human Rights Act. And
so
also,
just to be clear, this is not in the papers.
This is not really in the papers, no. I mean, I haven't seen much really at length talked about it apart from that.
Where can people find out more information?
Certainly they can find out from Liberty. There's been a couple of campaigns about specific aspects of it. So you might have missed the school census campaign that was to stop the government collecting information about children's nationality in schools that's going to be used in immigration checks. There's a clarification on that, though, which is that despite them not collecting the nationality, the nationality of each child, there's still information that gets sent to a government database that can be accessed by the Home Office. Now, the last bit is the immigration control exemption. And the exemption that the government has put into this data protection bill basically means that they don't have to respect any of these terms and conditions when it comes to immigration and when it comes to the Home Office trying to find out whether someone's here illegally or whether they don't believe them. And it means that if, for example, someone asks for a subject access request, now you're allowed to access your own information that any government body holds. And lots of people use that for helping them with their immigration status application or whatever. This means that the Home Office can say no. And it means that the Home Office can do whatever they like with that information. Now, we had in the Windrush scandal, we had the government destroying the landing cards and then saying, prove that you've been here for 50 years. This means that the government is basically able to do that at any point because they have no accountability, no safeguards in terms of how they handle your data or what you get to see. And they can also use third parties to handle your data. They can pass that on to companies like G4S and Capita and other contractors that they've got in their Home Office. Capita was the organisation, I've been told, that sent the 40,000 text messages to immigrants saying you need to go home, and that was done with Home Office information.
Okay, well,
so as the government is saying, this is a terrible thing, Windrush, we've not been thinking about the individual, we've been looking at policy. They're literally pushing through something that means that it will definitely happen again if we're being honest about how the government has been in terms of the hostile environment.
Yeah, I remember, as I probably mentioned last week, the woman, what was her name, Caroline Noakes, the immigration minister, she said, I can assure you, don't worry, I'm going to give everybody a biometric residency permit that's been affected by the Windrush deportations and the letters. So it looks like the underlying agenda doesn't go away. So
Yeah.
you've got this the data protection rule, and it just shows that they're sticking to normal business. Okay, so I hope that gets acted on a little bit more.
Yeah.
If nobody talks about it, then yeah, we'll have to start interviewing some people and putting that out there.
Absolutely. It's very, very important. And so there's under the GDPR, so the General Data Protection, is it rights? This is the EU bringing in this law to do with data protection. And it's really incredible that they've managed to get this through. And, Facebook is now readjusting itself so that it has minimum exposure actually to these rules, despite Mark Zuckerberg saying that he really cares about our privacy. In Denmark, they've already enacted a exemption of the GDPR for predictive policing. Now, that's possible that that's going to happen here also. So this affects lots of stuff to do with profiling and, stop and search and whatever. Denmark is also the other country in the EU that is very reliant, alongside us, on the services of Palantir.
Okay, yeah, and we've talked about the Palantir-Peter Thiel connection before. All right, well, on the subject of Capita, I noticed on Wednesday in the Daily Mail, they said that a year ago, Capita were found to have been targeting vulnerable people when they were chasing up TV licenses. And they then said that a whistleblower has sent some information, I think, to the Daily Mail, talking about the bonuses and the targets that Capita regional bosses were set to get their bonuses. So they were even more incentivizing people to go after vulnerable people for TV licenses. Mm-hmm. Funnily enough, a day later, I don't know if Capita have just had their AGM, it said that there are these things called LTIPs. I can't remember what they stand for. I think long-term something. It's an alternative name for bonus. So you have bonuses, and then afterwards you have LTIPs. And so it's a way of saying, oh, it's not my bonus, it's my LTIP.
Right.
And so
Semantics.
Capita bosses have been given these LTIPs, which are basically targets. So on Wednesday in the paper, they say, oh, it's terrible, Capita had targets for vulnerable people, or not vulnerable people, but for TV license prosecutions. And the next day it says, oh, by the way, our top brass have been given these targets in order to get their bonuses. This was all just a day or two after Amber Rudd did a U-turn on targets, didn't she? Can you talk about that?
The Home Office doesn't have any deportation targets. And this is not at the start of this scandal. This is a week in to Amber Rudd being grilled. And then the next day, it's confirmed that the Home Office do have deportation targets. And she suggests that she didn't know about them.
So what's the deal with targets then? What is a target? And, is a target a good or a bad thing?
Well, I guess we can go on to talk about it. But one thing I remembered was when we interviewed Will Davies, who's at Goldsmiths University. He talked about how once you start really quantifying the system and then you have these targets, what you always produce is gaming. So that people have ways of gaming the system, right? So with the Windrush scandal, you've got people destroying documents and then trying to deport these people because they're trying to reach ridiculous targets of I think it was 100,000 people they were trying to get the immigration down to.
Oh, yeah. Can I just say something on that subject?
Go on.
In today's City AM, in the editorial, they say, well, targets meant something when UKIP were running the show. I love that. That means UKIP aren't running the show now, but they were.
Right, yeah.
So when UKIP were breathing down the Tories' neck, then they had to really stick to the idea of targets. But now that UKIP have got a lot of what they wanted and that they've disintegrated, we're no longer in UKIP season. But can you believe that? Because actually it doesn't feel like that at all.
No, it doesn't.
It feels like it's only just started.
Yeah.
And so at City AM, they're saying, now that UKIP are no longer relevant, we don't have to talk about immigration targets anymore. We need to have strong borders, but instead we need to start thinking about how to attract talent.
Right.
What do you have to say about that? Have you, that's quite a lot to take in.
That is a lot to take in. Also because you're right, this moment we talked about last week, Enoch Powell, obviously with the Windrush scandal, this kind of momentum that's in the air about the things that people are talking about. Immigration is very much, seems to be centre stage, right? And there's lots of dog whistling happening. Interesting that that's their perception of things. That, well, it's fine now, we can just move on to the next thing. Now
they're a business paper.
We've just dropped this kind of grenade that's gone off in our society in terms of like what we talk about and what we think about. And as I said, it's weird, right, that the government has kicked down the road the immigration bill, right? So wasn't Brexit very much about immigration for many people? And yet we don't know what's happening as a result of that. Interesting. But coming back to targets, did you want to say something about that, by the way, before I move on?
It's just funny. The title in the physical paper version, it says Rudd must focus on talent, not numbers. And it said that she has to start thinking about people, not processes. And I thought that was quite funny because when she says people will come before processes at the Home Office, it made me think about the DWP as well.
And isn't that just exactly what she said as her defence anyway?
Yeah, she said, we've been far too focused on the ideology and we should be thinking about people. Yeah, so they're building on that and saying, okay, let's put people first. And then they're saying, we especially want talented people to come here. And then she said at the end, this is the City AM editorial. It says, assuming by then the hostile environment hasn't driven them elsewhere. Talking about the talent.
Wow. Interesting that you brought up the DWP. I really must get that right. They have similarly been creating, obviously, humiliating testing for claimants. There's been horrible management of welfare services and the fit to work tests and so on.
Didn't you break that story that it was to do with targets a few years ago?
I did a couple of articles with people who worked in the job centre who said, yeah, we absolutely do have targets. And the government was saying, no, of course we don't have targets for sanctions. And someone I spoke to said, actually, we have a board with how many each council has done in the local area. And if you're at the bottom of that board, you're in a bad position. And that whole idea of targets is definitely pushed. Of course, I mean, the number of sanctions that we've had has shot up incredibly in this country. Ian Duncan Smith is to thank for that. And those things have clearly been driven by people in the background. So and of course, what we had as a result of that was people being sanctioned for stupid reasons. Like, I didn't come to the job centre because I was at an interview, or I couldn't come to the job centre because my mother was sick, and all these things. All these people who have real reasons were then being pushed off.
So, in the same way that you said, Brexit is. Some people say Brexit was obviously about immigration, public opinion, immigration, and then afterwards, you're saying that the immigration bill is being delayed. So, in the same way that that's happened there. Right now, Amber Rudd's saying, no, we didn't have targets. Okay, yeah, we did have targets. So the idea that we did have targets, that we don't have targets, or we don't want to have targets, as Will Davis has been saying, that once you have targets, you have gaming. We used to have league tables, probably still do, for schools, hospitals, waiting times. We're never going to get rid of that because people want the information.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think it's also to do with increasing the use of data and, this ability to use all this information has created this idea that everything can be quantified and everything can all you need is a number that tells you this. But those statistics can be, also interpreted in different ways. And it depends on the kind of information that you're looking for. I think that can be really, really distorted. I mean, I'm just reading right now a book about medical devices and the healthcare industry and how corporate capture has affected it. And they talk in lots of ways about how the language of the healthcare industry distorts information for the public. So, for example, benefits, we would see, like, the idea of a benefit is it'd be comparable to, like, if I spend £1 on an investment and I get £1.50 back, my benefit is 50p. That's kind of how we'd understand a benefit, right?
Yeah, profit.
Yeah, but when they test things like medical devices, the benefit is completely separate to the risk. So you're not seeing a complete picture where you're saying, oh, in the end, you receive actually, 20% benefit for this. So while it might, for example, soothe your neck or help your hip, it might actually cause more heart attacks, or it might cause more seizures, and all those other things are in a separate category. So it's not the picture that we see. So when someone comes out and says there's a benefit, the risk is a totally different calculation. And sometimes with the corporate capture of the industry, it means that those problems that people have had with the device, for example, in the book that I'm reading about, it was the vagus nerve simulator, which is something they put in people's necks. When people died as a result of it, it was on the manufacturer's responsibility to report those deaths, and they never said that the problem was the device. They always said it was a sudden unexpected death, or it was caused by a different kind of seizure because it was for epilepsy.
Okay, so they don't report the side effects before you take it, and then when you die of the side effects, they say that you didn't die because of the thing.
Yeah.
Even though you only had the side effects as a result of the device that you were using.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, coming back to the idea of gaming, there's all sorts of ways that information can be distorted, and there's all sorts of language and legalese in certain industries that changes the meaning of it, so that by the time it reaches the public, it's not really a true picture.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah.
I went to a talk a couple of nights ago, and that was our friend Roger Hallam talking about activism.
Oh, yeah. How was it? I wasn't there.
Yeah, it was good. There were quite a few people there, and I think the general purpose of the talk was to say, if people aren't prepared to go to prison over something like trying to stop climate change, there's no point in talking about it. So, in summary, I would like to refer to that talk as from clickbait to jailbait. You go from seeing something and saying, oh yeah, like on Facebook, to ultimately saying, I feel quite strongly about this. I'm going to go a bit further than a like. I'm prepared to go to jail. And he actually gave out pieces of paper saying, are you prepared to go to jail? There's a whole form. Give me your Facebook, give me your number, and are you prepared to go to jail? And he said, I'm not asking anybody to go to jail, or telling you to. So I thought that was quite interesting, the whole idea of motivation.
Is it also about breaking down some of the fears that people have? Because
I'm not going to do it. I'm not prepared to go to jail over it.
And why not? No, there's no subject that would be important to you enough for you to go to jail for.
I don't think so. Not at the moment. I mean, that was the whole purpose of the whole thing. And no, I'm too much of a coward.
Too much of a coward, or also brown and maybe don't want to be arrested?
No, it's not. Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of that, but I just don't want to. I don't want to go to jail because I'm protesting about climate change. So,
do you think it's important that there are people who are prepared to do that? Like, do you think that's an important? What Hallam is, I'm imagining, he's focused on creating change, putting pressure onto politicians. He's working out those ideas of how to do that. So, do you think it does require, though, a group of people who are prepared to do it, even if it's not you?
I don't know. I mean, yes, it does, but at the same time, the examples that he uses are Martin Luther King and Gandhi.
Mm.
So he's got a PhD in nonviolent direct action, and so he knows about a lot of the various tricks and effects that you can take advantage of, sociological ones that are predictable. So he knows what works, and he's done it himself. But do I think people should be doing that? I can't tell somebody to do that myself.
Have you got? Yeah, but it's a tactic, right? It's a technique, and I think it's an important part of the process to alleviate fears that people have normally about going on to these sorts of actions, and understanding that if you get arrested, which many people do, that it's not the end of the world, and that perhaps, generally, I think Roger gets off with lots of cautions and stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, just because Roger does.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not saying that's the rule, but I'm saying there's probably a group of people who are able to use certainly a degree of privilege to be able to do that, and isn't his point about the Gandhi and the MLK stuff that they all had people going to prison during their protests.
Yeah, I think the idea is if you can get 1,000 people going to prison on the same day for an event, which I think actually the plan is November 4th. On November 4th, oh no, there's no secrets here. It's fine. It's all very upfront. So November 4th, I think some event somewhere at some time, people are going to do something and try and get lots of people arrested in order to highlight the issue of climate change. Now, on that subject, BP, Cambridge University, they occupied a college on Thursday last week, and it was reported in the FT and in The Guardian on Monday. There was a joint letter that was signed by academics and students saying, we've got to do something about our investment program. We need to not invest in fossil fuels because if we do, then that's unsustainable. It's not a good idea. On Tuesday, I think in the daytime at an oil industry conference, Bob Dudley, the American who heads up BP, he was asked how he feels about that. And he said, well, we give a lot of money to Cambridge, so we hope at some stage they'll come to their senses. And then on the internet, that was interpreted as being a threat. I mean, who knows what he meant by that, whether he was actually saying, oh, we're not going to give you any money. You know, if you divest from us, we'll divest from you.
That's what it's suggesting. Don't you think that's what it's suggesting with those words?
Let me think again. What did he say? We give them a lot of money, so we hope they come to their senses. Yeah. Well, I think it's perfectly understandable, him saying, we're not going to give you any money anymore. I think that's probably just what he's thinking. So he's probably just thinking, oh, we've got such an ancient relationship. You know, I would like for it to continue. You know, he doesn't think that anything that he does is bad. So he's probably just thinking, oh, it would be a real shame. What I did also think was, of course, that let's say BP is 100, 120 years old. Cambridge University, I don't think it's a big sort of secret that Cambridge is a place where a lot of intellectuals are there. Also, the intelligence agencies would be recruiting from Cambridge. And I think they've got a secret society there called the Apostles, which I think is probably slightly over 100 years old. These kinds of links that are there, it's a huge symbolic thing for them to just say no to fossil fuels. And for someone like him, he just can't let that happen on his watch. Yeah. Because, you know, it's the establishment, isn't it? I just thought it was quite funny the way that, first of all, it was made to look like it was a threat. But if you're on the other side, if you are the campaigners, then you've got to take what you can.
Yeah.
So in the end, the Guardian and the Telegraph, they put stories on their website, but the FT were the only paper that actually spoke about it in the physical paper, and they put it on the front of their companies and market section, the business section. So I thought that was a clear example of what Clearborn calls organised silence. Because BP, but not just BP, I mean, the Guardian will be taking money for ads for cars, cheap flights, all this kind of stuff. So in a way, I think they're disincentivized from running that type of a story. Because if the Guardian start talking about the divestment campaign at Cambridge in that way, I mean, that's really all roads lead to that. Because they did talk about it on Monday, but they just spoke about the letter.
Right.
They didn't, and the letter wasn't to BP. It was to the Cambridge management. This time, it's actually the BP guy saying we're going to take some money out. So if you read the Guardian newspaper, you would never know about this. You know, it's buried on the website.
But clearly an important story for the FT and thereby, I guess, the city.
Well, yeah, the FT, they're interested in asset management and all that sort of thing, which is related to the carbon bubble, all that kind of thing. And it made me think also of Lindsay McGowie's got a new book coming out, well, I think it's out next year, called Strategic Ignorance, something like that. I think it's called The Unknowers.
Yeah,
and
about strategic ignorance.
Yeah, it'd be great to get her to tell us a bit more about that.
Well, we're seeing it every day, right? So Amber Rudd, I don't know any deportations. We haven't got any targets. I didn't know we had targets, but also across the government. So you had the homelessness minister saying, I don't know why rough sleeping numbers are going up. We were just talking about welfare. And one of the things that Ian Duncan Smith did when we had an increase in food bank usage. So you have vouchers, that means you get a referral to go to the food bank. And there's a reason for referral. This is something that the Trussell Trust did, which is one of the biggest food banks in the UK. Christian charity, and they put reason for referral. And because welfare reforms were put on there so many times, Ian Duncan Smith removed that from the voucher.
Yeah, I heard they also changed the definition of child poverty a few years ago as well. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Obviously we're increasing the number of children who are growing up in poverty, and then I don't think they got around to actually changing it, but David Cameron said, "Oh, it's an old measure. It doesn't work anymore." Bearing in mind we have increasing numbers of people who are living in poverty, and he said because of the means testing, it's wrong. Basically, it doesn't give a fair reflection. Again, that's a way of playing the statistics, right? If you give it new markers by which you measure this by, then it can look like we don't really have a problem. And at the same, talking about data and Capita. I know there's a story that you sent to me about the Pip assessments.
So this is for people who are ill.
Yeah, performance independence payments. They replaced another disability payment, and obviously this is all to do with more means testing and what have you. One of the things, a couple of things to give you an example of.
This is Capita and Atos, right?
Yeah,
So they're doing these tests to find out if you're ill or not.
Yeah.
And they're not very compassionate in these tests, from what I understand.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And I think at one stage, a couple of years ago, it was about 40% of the decisions for Fit to Work were overturned. There was a small story just after that Ian Duncan Smith's plan was to, what was it to do? It was to prevent, he was working out how to prevent people having appeals, basically. So we give you this decision, okay, you've got some process by which you can prove that we were wrong, even though you're probably sick or ill or something, and you still have to go through this process. But that's too good for you. So now we're going to take out your ability to appeal these processes. And of course, ATOS and Capita will have targets that they are being told to meet in terms of people being kicked off sickness registers or long-term
I've got some good news though,
unemployment.
Cam. I've got some good news though.
Go on.
We got a surplus this year. I think a couple of days ago they reported that austerity was worth it because we had a surplus. So I think the first time since 2002. So, we're all in it together, and well done, everyone. I think it was I read in the editorial of The Sun.
I'm pretty sure George Osborne tweeted that he was very proud.
Yeah, well done, you guys.
Yeah, and that his belief, we stuck through it. What a hideous man.
This is targets.
He said by 2015, I will halve the debt.
And then it was
he missed all those targets. And then now that he's working for BlackRock in the Evening Standard and whoever else is employing him.
I really thought that George Osborne at this stage would have been Prime Minister. I thought he would take over as Prime Minister in 2018, because I thought Cameron would win in 2015 and then hand over. And someone pointed out to me, no, in fact, I thought it was 2020. Then I thought 2018, and someone pointed out to me that he can't just hand it over like that. Of course, events have got in the way. But before that, around 2016, I assumed that Osborne would possibly still be Chancellor, but just about to be Prime Minister, and that we would need to have some kind of a bromance between George Osborne and Sadiq Khan. And Cam's pulling funny faces. And we still do need to have a bromance between them, but unfortunately it's in a different... Well, because now he's the editor of The Standard.
Oh, God.
But do you remember when Sarah Sands, who's now the editor of Today programme on Radio 4, she backed Sadiq Khan, and he was basically... she backed Zach Goldsmith, and he was calling Sadiq Khan a terrorist.
That's true. It was a hideously racist campaign that he led.
Well,
and was his piece in the Evening Standard?
Whose?
Zach Goldsmith, where he said Sadiq Khan is going to conduct an experiment on London.
I don't know.
Daily Mail?
I don't know.
I can't remember.
What were you going to say about Katie Balls?
What was I going to say about Katie Balls? Oh.
From the Spectator podcast.
Yeah. So she was saying basically that it's come back to bite Theresa May and Amber Rudd possibly that they called the hostile environment such a catchy name.
But they didn't name it the hostile environment. Apparently it was Alan Johnson.
And that, she said that she preferred a more longer, well, no, not that she preferred, but it would have been more effective or easier for them now if they'd come up with a more difficult, convoluted, longer idea for this subject, which, goes to show that clearly these are techniques that people can use in order to make something seem boring that people don't want to get into.
Yeah, Lucy Reynolds, she says, you've got to boringize it. If you make it boring, giving it a strange acronym, then
TTIP.
Yeah, TTIP, something like that.
Just on the coming back to the idea of the hostile environment, Stephen Bush did a piece where he talked about the hostile environment and also mentioned, that similar techniques have been used in the welfare system. And one example of where Ian Duncan Smith said that your records could be used so that if you're found on a protest, that you will be sanctioned. So that data sharing will be used so that if you've got time to protest, then you've got time to look for a job. So similar kind of data sharing. And
I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah, incredible.
What about Operation Farken? What's that? Did you tell me about that story?
I don't think I did.
Well, apparently the name for when they sent the van around telling everybody to go home.
Oh, God.
Yeah, apparently nobody knew what it meant, but there's a translation of that Swedish word is a German poem, and it means Germany awaken or something. But it's I think it's quite an anti-Semitic one, that one, and it's basically just saying, you don't belong here, sort of thing.
Wow.
And so then they were speculating in this Guardian article whether it was somebody who was saying that, giving it that name because they felt uncomfortable about it, or whether it was somebody who's just a full-on Nazi.
Wow. What a choice.
Ben Judah wrote an article in today's FT in which I think he interviewed, but he certainly went down to Novara. And it was interesting. There was different bits in it that were, it moved in different directions. Ben Judah himself, I've seen him speak once. He's very good. He's written a book called This is London, and he used to be foreign correspondent for some paper in Russia. And he basically said that his younger brother, Ben Judah's younger brother, has had enough of the Labour Party because of anti-Semitism. He's about 19.
Right.
And at the same time, he said, what's really funny about Momentum, because Novara have a sort of link with Momentum, he said, what's funny about Momentum is that it's so Jewish. Apparently, John Landsman, who runs it, and they were interviewing different people who were in it. And, they just sounded, very motivated and happy to be there. I was with a couple of friends this week, and I've met a couple of people who are Jewish and are completely convinced that this is a totally anti-Semitic project.
What is an anti-Semitic project?
Everything about Corbyn. They're older and they're just convinced of it. So as they are older than me, I didn't want to contradict them. I don't know what I said, but there's quite a few older people who, and I think it's fair enough to think that because you can only act on what you see. And if all you see is what's in front of you in the paper, then why would you think any different? I mean, I believe quite a lot of things I see in the paper too.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a tough one because they're absolutely right to speak out however they're feeling. And I mean, there's John Landsman is Jewish, and he gets
a lot of grief. Basically, that's what he said in the article.
And he suffers from a lot of anti-Semitism from the media and certain figures. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting. How this story's played out. I mean, it's difficult. It's a difficult one.
Yeah, well, I mean, it looks to me at the moment as though, as a consumer of the news, that I'm being asked to choose between Jews and Jamaicans. And that's how it feels in terms of attention that's been given to different things. And David Goodhart, again, sorry to go back there, he was on Channel 4 News the other day with Jacob Rees-Mogg, and he kept on saying, as do have other people I've met, they keep on saying, oh, the whole Windrush thing, it was just mistakes, just incompetence. Despite the fact that people are saying, hello, I'm a human being, can't you listen to me?
What they're also doing is constantly shifting it on to illegal immigration, which has nothing to do with this story, right? Windrush citizens are British citizens. This is the furthest away you could be from the idea of illegal immigration, but they keep saying those words on Newsnight and on the interviews. I keep seeing it being shifted over to illegal immigration.
Well, I think Yvette Cooper's questions, and of course she did abstain throughout all of this stuff in 2014 when it was going through, but she kept on, and she did a good job of saying, look, this is the targets, isn't it? It's because of the targets that all of this is happening. All right, let's move on before we actually get into some trouble. What about Barclays? Barclays reported a quarter of a billion pound loss yesterday, and they said, but we wouldn't be in the red if it weren't for the fact that we had to pay a £1 billion fine in America. So I think this is the kind of too big to jail cost of doing business. It's quite funny because all the banks are reporting their figures now, so you can actually see, roughly once a year, how much they had to pay all year for their fines.
Are they suggesting that the £1 billion payment was a outlier?
It's a cost of doing business. I think that's the general understanding. And then the shareholders will say, well, because I think they probably made far more than that the year before. So
yeah,
that's or the quarter before. The other thing that's quite funny is that Jess Staley, so in the same way that Bob Dudley is an American in charge of BP, who makes an offhand comment and everybody says, oh my God, you're threatening academic freedom here. Jess Staley, he was fined £1 million by the FCA for trying to unmask a whistleblower, one of our favourite subjects. And they also cleared him of lacking integrity whilst they fined him. So you couldn't really make that up, could you? I'm fining you £1 million, but at the same time, let it not be said that you lack integrity.
Wow.
What kind of a signal is that sending? So what should I do? Should I follow the law or not? Is there a law? What's going on?
Yeah. There's always this kind of term that's always put as well onto big fines, so RBS, which we looked at for a while. Every time that they pay these big fines, the condition is that they don't have to admit wrongdoing. They don't have to say.
It's deferred prosecution. Yeah, there's a really good book called Too Big to Jail that came out a couple of years ago, Brandon Garrett, and they say that all of the deferred prosecution scenarios that the banks are using in order to get out of any kind of criminality, it all comes from drug dealing on the street in America. If you agree to this, I'll just give you deferred prosecution. Wow. It is actually, that's the gangsterism of Wall Street coming through.
But what does that do in society? So corporations will use the same thing. If all these big cases that actually have a huge effect on thousands of people that matter, right, that need to be put right, in the end they get to say, we didn't do anything wrong.
So there was a statue of a woman that went up.
Oh, yeah.
Is it Millicent Fawcett? Millicent Fawcett. And there was no photo in the Sun the next day. There was in the Daily Mail.
I'm so surprised.
Well, there was a photo in a few papers. In the Sun, they didn't have a photo. They had lots of photos of women that day, but not this woman.
Not that woman.
And then in the editorial, they said we should have a statue in there for Thatcher. What have you got to say about that? And just a couple of other things whilst I remember. On Monday...
Why are they so determined to get something to do with that flipping woman?
Yeah, and then on Monday... Cam, please, don't be rude. On Monday, I think, there was an article with Raj Persod, the television psychiatrist, and a couple of other, and somebody else. And they were talking about how if you look at the weather in the morning, if it looks like it's going to be a sunny day, the stock market is more likely to go up. And the next day, there was an article by Paul Ormerod, who writes for the IEA. He's a kind of behavioral economist, I guess. And that was talking about positive feedback loops. And I started to think that if you trade because of good weather, then you're going to have a positive feedback loop because the stock market will go up. And when the stock market goes up, there'll be more investment in fossil fuels. The carbon bubble will get bigger and we're more likely to have more climate change. And as a result of that, the weather will be warmer and the positive feedback loop means that people like Raj Persod will start investing more. You can tell that my infinity course is kicking in here. Yeah. And then, just that's it. In a way, that's actually what's already happening, isn't it? But I don't want to...
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Any other stories?
From the last week? I don't think so.
Well, one thing I'd quite like somebody to explain to me is Nigel Farage. I think we mentioned this last time, I can't remember, but he is against the state but loves the nation state. I started to notice that he does that. He says, George Soros and Hillary, they all hate the nation state. They're against the nation state. But then, he wants to take the state apart.
But what would you say about his kind of his bromance with Trump in this regard?
Well, yeah, I think they're coming at it from the same place, aren't they? They want to deregulate everything, and that's it. Oh, of course, Trump's coming here on your birthday, isn't he?
Oh God,
that's great.
Yes.
Don't you like Donald Trump?
I'd say what Chris Hedges says about this. So the choice right now in America would be between the incompetent fascists and the fascists. So that's Trump and Pence, and it's better to have Trump than Pence.
Well, they're both ALEC guys.
Yeah.
There's an article in today's FT which I haven't read yet, but I think
that's 13th of July. By the way, I need everybody to know my birthday, so you can send me lots of nice things.
Yeah,
I mean,
data
send
protection,
stuff to
Cam. Data protection. The Gillian Tett article in the FT is talking about all the deregulation that's happening right now. So they're just dismantling America
in the US.
Yeah, with the regulation, and that reminds me of a question I asked Clear Paul the other day. Well, we did, which was when's the next crisis coming? And she said, well, the seeds were sown, straight after the first one because we haven't done anything about it. But it looks as though all of these moves right now, it's going to be really, really bad. I mean, all the regulations they're taking away. So now they're just doing a lot of lending and they're going to take a lot of risk. It's going to be a really bad crash when it comes.
I was reading Freedom to Harm, which you recommended to me, and some really powerful ending chapters, which is to do with the kind of 4 stages of attacks by the business community from the 70s in terms of getting their agenda, this deregulation agenda, as common sense, as Bev Skeggs described it. And he said after 2008, there was such an appetite for reining in the free market. There was such an appetite for regulation. And Obama came in saying that he was going to be the agent of change, and he did nothing. He tried to acquiesce the other side and say that, I want to...
Appease.
Yeah. and say that we're going to do it together. And what people really wanted at that point, he had control of the 2 houses, so he had all the opportunities to make change.
I think what they said was his equivalent of a Home Secretary, I think his name is Garner, I can't remember, Eric Garner, when he decided to resign, people said, you helped improve. They said this at the time because this is before Black Lives Matter happened. They said, you did a lot to help civil rights, but you didn't do anything to help deal with Wall Street, because I don't know if he was in charge of the Department of Justice or something like that.
Right.
But yeah. Now, do you think that we should stop moaning? Because we're always moaning, aren't we? And when I was watching Roger the other day, and then afterwards I've been reading this thing about climate change, and it's sort of quite a skeptical thing by the IEA that I'm reading, and it's basically just talking about how people who complain about climate change are like Puritans. It's a kind of religion. And shouldn't we just stop complaining to be happy?
Stop complaining to be happy?
Because if you moan all the time, then afterwards, you're more likely to get ill.
I don't know if it's moaning all the time. I think there's a difference between moaning and understanding and talking about the dominant structures and who has power in your society, and being aware of who has power in your society, because that's very important. I don't count that as moaning. People need to know that. We should know who's got the wealth, who's got the power, who's making decisions.
You've got no sense of humour.
Whether we should, I don't know but at the same time, it's completely wrong to be. It's difficult. You shouldn't be fatalist. You shouldn't, what you should listen to is that speech by Chris Hedges called "Stop Fascism 2017," and he talks about how everything that you do to stand against the system is good in itself, right, and it's important. Okay.
Well, I think you should listen to Amusing Ourselves to Death.
This first, obviously.
Okay, I think it's time to wind up.
Okay. Well, we'll see you next time.
Okay, see you next time. Bye.
Bye.